So now I would like to call our next speaker, Thomas Denk, who is sort of the father of beach taxonomy. Can I say that? No, he refuses. So yeah, it's a great pleasure to have you here, Thomas.
Okay, good morning. So my name is Thomas Denk. I'm working at the Swedish Museum of Natural History, but I may also be the only Austrian here, not Swedish. But I've been living there for many years. So I think the title of my talk was told me by Kati, kind of. So I just followed her. So the title of my talk is How Many Species of Fagus Are There in Eurasia? But I think the main focus will be on Western Eurasia, since we are all interested in Oriental beach, and there may be different ideas about how many species we really have in Western Eurasia. But still, I will talk about all of Eurasia. So what you can see here on this title slide is different fruiting cups or cupules of different species of Fagus across Eurasia. And I just compiled this to show you that there is a quite big range of morphological variability in these elements, and they can be used to distinguish and to determine different species of Fagus. Well, we have, according to some people's opinion, about 14 to 15 species of beaches in worldwide. And if you look at the panel A here on top, we have 2 species in North America. We have 4 species, but other people think only 1 in Western Eurasia. And we have 8 to 9 species in East Asia. And what I think is important here, and we should keep that in mind, is that if you look at this global distribution, you see that the distribution is quite disrupted. So we have isolated areas in North America, Eurasia, 2 in Eurasia. And this is certainly the result of a very long evolutionary history. So just to remind you that we had fossils of beech trees in Western North America going to Alaska, and then coming in the Far East, so connecting the North American with the East Asian area. We had fossils here on Axel Heiberg Island, Greenland, Iceland, connecting the North American range with the European one. We have lots of fossils in Central Asia. So this was definitely a much more homogeneous distribution in the past. And if we then look at panel C here, so here we have the large range of the European beech, Fagus sylvatica, and then here is the Oriental beech that in a strict sense, occurring from Eastern Bulgaria to Eastern Turkey. Then we have the Caucasian beech that goes all the way south and north of the Caucasus, almost to the Caspian Sea, and then the scattered distribution of the Caspian beech. So these are the 4 species that I propose to recognize in Western Eurasia. There were many, so I'm not the father of beech taxonomy because that started like many hundred of years ago. So there were many different opinions about how many species of Fagus there are in Western Eurasia. But I just want to say that the fathers of beech taxonomy, they considered de Condol, for instance, thought that the European beech or the European beech and the Japanese beech, for instance, are the same species. So they had a much wider species concept. And it has changed a lot. So that's the outline here. And then just to show you, if we look at, if we compare modern ranges here, and here, and then look at, it's a bit confusing, but the only important thing is looking at the fossil record, it shows that they were much more abundant at higher latitudes in the past. And the oldest beech that is an unambiguous beech fossil is from Western Greenland. It's 60 million years old. So it's a very old lineage. And during that time, beech was kind of distributed here in North America and in Northern Asia. And I showed that because I think that the initial niche of a tree lineage is also very important for the future ecological properties that the lineage will have. And in case of beech, it's not like in oaks, which are super variable ecologically. Beech trees are, despite we are talking about different climate niches and so, but they are very conservative in terms of climate requirements. And that's maybe a legacy of this early evolution of beech. And then I just talking about beeches. There are two subgenera in beech. One is restricted to East Asia, only a few species called subgenus Englerianae, and the other one that includes also the European and the Asian minor beeches is called the subgenus Fagus. And so already here we have a quite distinct morphological differentiation. So if you look at quickly at Fagus, the subgenus Fagus, we see that these are, as you all know, single-stemmed large trees. Looking at the fruits, they have these fruiting cups on rather stout peduncles. Also interesting to look at the leaves. The lower leaf surface in this subgenus is mainly glabrous. And if we look at that under very high magnification here, so this is an image of a scanning electron microscope where you see the stomata where the plants are breathing. And this is like 30 micrometers long. You see that it's glabrous. There is nothing on the leaf surface. That's important. If you look at pollen grains, they are large. And these pores here is where the pollen germinates when it fertilizes the female flower. They are quite short. And if you look at leaves, they can be either toothed or with an entire margin. If you look at the other subgenus, we see here that they are multi-stemmed trees. They are not growing like the beech trees we are used to see. They have very slender peduncles of their cupules. The leaf surface in these, the lower leaf surface in these species is bluish. And that's because here in large magnification, they are really densely covered with wax crystals. And they are a little bit knobby, so you have lots of papillae on the lower leaf surface, so they look very different. The pollen grains are also very different. They are much smaller, and they have not these short pores where they germinate. They have very long so-called apertures that are almost going all the way to the pole of the pollen grain. And leaves are delicate, so they are normally much thinner. They have more secondary veins, and usually they have no distinct teeth. So there are quite strong differences between the two subgenera. So just to show you very quickly how these East Asian species look like. And I just want to tell you that if you are in the field in East Asia, it's rather easy to identify and you recognize every species, it's no problem. Because they have very stable leaf features, like this shape is very distinct, called trulate, and then different type of dentition. Here, for instance, this species you also always recognize. It has these little bit roundish teeth, and between two teeth, the leaf margin is always convex. So there are some stable characters that really can be used to identify all the species. And now we come to Western Eurasia. So if you look at beech populations in Western Eurasia, we have the large area that is covered by European beech, Fagus sylvatica. Well, that's what you all know, very familiar. You have the fruiting cups, you have the leaves. Leaves are often a little bit asymmetric. And then if we come to northern Turkey, we have what is traditionally considered as the most important distinguishing character of Fagus orientalis. And that here you can see that the cupules, they are beset with some small green leaves or leaflets. And these leaflets are, of course, very diagnostic. They have been taken as the main feature to distinguish Oriental beech. Also, the leaves look quite different from the European ones, even though there is a cline. If you go to Bulgaria, even in Austria, you see already something a bit similar to such leaves, but it's most distinct here in northern Turkey, and that's Oriental beech. But if we then go further to the east, we see that this feature is by no means found all over the range of the traditionally defined Oriental beech. So if we go to the Caucasus, we don't find these green leaflets. And overall, the fruiting cups look quite different. They have these thread-like appendages, and the basal ones look almost like bud scales, so they're very membranous, but a little bit thinner. And also the leaves, I will show a bit more in detail in the next slides. They are quite different. They're very large. I should also mention that in the Caucasus, I think we have the most humid climate across Western Eurasia. There are some areas where we have 4,000 millimeters rainfall per year in the Western Georgia, for instance. And then if we continue to the Caspian Sea, northern Iran and Azerbaijan, we find again a fruiting cup that looks very similar to the Western European one. So no matter if you like recognition of different species or not, you can also treat that as one species, but we have to be aware of that there are quite big morphological differences, along with quite some ecological differences also and climatic differences. So I won't talk about the fathers of beech taxonomy too much, but one which I found really quite interesting was by Joe Duty, who apparently was German, but had a very non-German sounding name. And he wrote a paper in 1985 where he recognized European beech and Oriental beech in the traditional way, all the way from eastern Bulgaria to the Caspian Sea. And he has these, well, no leaflets on the cupule and full of green leaflets for the Oriental beech. But then he found in Central Europe something that he called Fagus intermedia. This is not a valid name. It was not validly published. And this, in Tuti's opinion, were populations that had some different, like a mixture of this kind of fruiting cup and this kind of fruiting cup. So sometimes small, starting to be leaflet-like appendages. And this was his Fagus intermedia. I was, of course, curious because I haven't sampled Fagus in these areas so much, a little bit in Romania, and but I looked in Austria, and when I didn't do my military service, but my whatever alternative service, close to that school I was working, I went with the children to the forest, and I found this, which I found really very exciting because here you have these leaflets, and then, of course, my spontaneous idea was okay, when the Ottoman Empire almost conquered the city of Graz, which is in eastern Austria, they may have brought some, food for the pigs, or I don't know. But maybe that was just my idea. I have no idea why they look like this and how they are genetically, I don't know. But so we have these forms, they are there, but I don't know what they are. But during my PhD, I was traveling a lot, and I was looking at these appendages, and I just briefly tell you I found the green ones only in northern Turkey, and then you see this change, Western Georgia, Great Caucasus into Iran, where these cupule appendages become less and less conspicuous. And now I just show you these, not four, because I don't show you any pictures of Fagus sylvatica, the three remaining populations or species, whatever you want. because this is a bit interesting when we look at orientalis forests in Central Europe, because we are interested, what are they? I can just tell you, once I went to the botanical garden in Tübingen, I saw an oriental beech, and I saw immediately it's from Georgia, no doubt. So you can recognize where they come from. So this is northern Turkey, and you see these very symmetrical leaves, also very beautiful leaves. Normally they are not dentate, but in very shady habitats they can be very coarsely dentate. And then of course we have these very nice green leaflets on the fruiting cups. Then if we continue to the Caucasus, we have superficially very similar leaves, but if we look at the base, and I found this to be a rather common character, not all of the populations have it, but it's quite common that you have this rounded base, and then it's like inverted pear-shaped. That's what I called it. And looking at the fruiting cups, they are definitely quite different from the Turkish ones. So there is no similarity at all. And then the newest species that we proposed, Fagus caspica, was, I have to admit, initially also very much inspired by Gömöri et al., various papers that looked at the biogeography of Western Eurasian beech trees. And so initially we saw that there is some match between the morphotypes that I recognized and these the genetic pattern that they found. And the Iranian beeches, they were quite isolated. What I knew from my work with fossil plants was also that in Iran, maybe beech populations survived for a very long period. They were definitely there during the last glacial maximum, not like in other parts of Asia Minor. So they have a long history on their own. And also looking at the leaf morphology, I found things that I haven't seen in other populations. Like one thing is the cordate leaf base that you quite usually find. And they are very often dentate, but the teeth are not very, very large, but very distinct, almost approaching what we see in North American beeches. And again, the cupules look more like the far away Western European ones. So these are the 3 + 1, 4 species of Western Eurasia. And if we now take also not my work, but work from others, but looking at the genetic clusters that have been identified for Western Eurasian beeches, and then, as I understand, the most supported number of clusters here would be 5 clusters. And then we see that we really have genetic groups that are quite distinct. We say Sylvatica orientalis, the Caucasian beech that is named Boenacariana, and the Caspian or Iranian beech that's called Caspica. And then we have a intermediate or ancestral cluster, which is quite interesting. Also, this is an area that should be sampled and studied much more. And now if we keep that in mind, and then I show you 2 slides with a few fossils, and then I'm finished. So we are also interested when do these morphotypes occur in the fossil record? I mean, we are interested how old are these species, how old are these populations? And here is one example. There is a modern herbarium sheet exactly from this intermediate, possibly ancestral genetic zone. And there is a fossil from Greece that is 6 million years old. It's quite old, but I mean, geologically it's quite young, but it's quite old. It's 6 million years old. And it looks super, super similar. It's very, very similar. So during that time, we have leaf shapes that are very similar to the modern Oriental beech. I call it just like Oriental beech in a wide sense. But we have nothing that looks like the European beech. And these, it also got a name, which is not important, but such leaf types occur in Greece, in Turkey, in Italy, in Spain, during the late Miocene, a bit older, 10 million years ago, to about 4 million years ago. If we look into leaf fossils from Central Europe, we see that they look quite different. They have some, well, they start approaching a little bit Sylvatica, but not really much. But they are more like a mosaic of leaf shapes that we find today in East Asia. If we look also at the stomata and the leaf micromorphology, they look more like, this looks a bit like Fagus crenata from Japan. They look more like some central Chinese species. There's not much of Sylvatica there. And true Sylvatica fossils are very young. They are like not older than 1 million years, so much younger than the other ones. That shows also that possibly the modern populations have very, very different evolutionary histories. So they are different. And then I just conclude. So there appear to be, let's say, more than one species of Fagus in Western Eurasia. And they are not just cryptic species that are only recognized by their genetic signatures. They are also morphologically distinct. The eastern part of Western Eurasia has greater genetic diversity. So the recognition of new species in these areas is therefore not so surprising. And I just want to say that there is a strong parallel to oaks, because oak diversity, genetic diversity, but maybe also species diversity increases a lot if we go to the east. And I think there are many undescribed oak species in Asia Minor. And there are some main morphological features that we can use to distinguish Fagus species. I don't read them here. And very important also, some areas are really understudied. They need to be studied more. One is the South Turkish part where Turkey borders Syria. It's the Hatay province of Turkey, where the old Amanos mountains, they are not now called Nur mountains, are. These are genetically quite distinct populations, more of a cryptic species, but maybe not. They have leaves like the northern Turkish beeches, but they have cupules like the European ones. And some of my colleagues want to publish them as a new species. And the other area is, of course, central northern Turkey. It's this intermediate zone. And also Crimea would be interesting to restudy. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much.